Okay, so I talked about this idea of using instances as a source to replicate objects and keeping them like in another scene. In response to Jarek Synergy's question about if you could have kind of a smart object, so to speak. And the way that works in Blender is, let's just go to a new scene here. All right, I mean a new file here. So let's just keep it simple, and we're talking about a light and a box and a camera. And we have this collection, so I'll rename this collection to source, right? And show the simplest way first would be just to simply say, okay, we have this collection in here, it's got a camera, cube, and a light, and if I go Shift A, and I go collection instance source, and now I have a copy of it, but you see the only thing inside that copy is just itself, it's just an instance of the original. So we can transform this one over here, and now the copy of it, the instance, it has a center right here. So the center of that is not the center of this object, it's the center of this instance. So let me show you how that works. If I move this out of the way, you see that both boxes moved because I'm removing the original. So this is like models, anybody that's used models in XSI, or maybe even a group instance in Maya, right? So that you got this sort of group, right, that has a transform on it, and then this objects inside that group can also be transformed, right? So it's going to move wherever it moves relative to center. So this is going to be moving relative to that null. This is going to be moving relative to center. And that null is always like moving the center of this scene to other places, right? And so that's how that works. It can be a little confusing when you don't see exactly how it works. So so now, if I go back to 0, you see now that's back into the center. So that object is only in the center because that's where it is in the scene related to the collection. And so now the source, these even though there's a hierarchy here, there is no, it's not like a group in Maya where a group itself can be a hierarchy or a can receive transforms. There is no transforms on this collection. But when you add it as an instance, it does have a transform. So now it becomes a group that you can move around. Okay, and so now the next way to do this would be to simply add a new scene, right? And now we can switch between the scenes here, right? Scene 1 and the original scene, right? So we could call this source, right? Or hey, for the heck of it, let's call this modeler, right? So that's our modeler scene. And then this is our layout scene, right? Just to relate it to LightWave, right? Layout. Oops. Okay, so now we have these two scenes. We got the modeler and we got layout. Now, of course, strictly in modeler, unless you were using, what is it, Power-Gons or whatever, you wouldn't have lights in there. So let's just go to the original scene and delete the camera and the light. So now we have this instance has been moved over there, right? Let's put it in, actually first let's go back here so it's really clear. Just take this and delete it. That's just a cube now. So in modeler we have this cube, right? In this source instance, and now we're going to go to layout, and we have Shift A, and we can add collection instance source. It could be called cube or whatever, but now it's just this cube, and this cube can be moved around, but you can see there's no way to add modifiers to it, so you can't, you know, deform it or do any other things. You can do some constraints, it looks like, and some physics perhaps, but you can't really animate it in terms of deformations, right? It's just a model, it's just an object, right? So now if you go back to the source modeler, this would be similar to LightWave for those following this. Like if you were in modeler and you took this object and you put it over here, well, it would always have this 0 as its origin, right? And so now if you go back to the layout scene, you see that if you save that object, you would see that it was over here, but the center of the object was here. So that's kind of relating it back to LightWave and modeler that way. So that normally like the workflow in modeler would be that, so you were here in modeler and you say, All right, this is going to be cube, and let's just rename that as cube, right? And so it has a cube object inside of it and a layer named cube, right? So it'd be like the cube layer with cube in it. And now let's just put it back at 0. So now we go over to layout, and layout it's at 0. Now let's move it in layout, and we're going to say now let's animate it in layout and move it around or rearrange a bunch of objects the way we would in layout. Each time you add it, load it from or send it to the layout from Modeler, it would appear again in the center. And it's going to appear here related to where it is at the source scene. So let's go back to Modeler, because it's here in the center, of course. That's where it is. So now if I make another, if I actually move the cube here, right, even though the cursor is here, right, when I go back to the layout, and these are all moved over here, right, because they have now been moved relation to center. So when I do another one, and I go cube, now it also is going to be offset, but the center of it is still here, right? So that's what I was talking about in that post, about the difference between these two. Now, the difference between this and Modeler is that if you wanted to animate these things, you'd have to do that inside the Modeler type of interface, or the similar to models in XXI and perhaps groups in Maya, right? So you'd have to actually add the armature here and animate it here, and do any of the deformations or modifiers and all that stuff would have to happen here. And so this has some limited use if you look at it from that point of view, obviously. So you just have to decide what it is you're trying to do. If you want to have instances of things that you can then load into layout and manipulate them with bones like you would in layout, it's not going to work that way. All right, so hope that makes sense.